Toxic ex showed up demanding child support before my wedding, claiming her kid is mine. Turns out the kid is my stepbrother's. My fiancé and I have been together for the past 4 years, and a few months ago, I decided that it was finally time for us to get married. We got engaged and I posted that picture on my social media, just like I would with any sort of good news. Somehow, my ex-girlfriend found that picture and showed up out of nowhere. My ex and I were together for almost 5 years, but those were some of the most toxic years of my life, and when I finally found the courage to end that relationship, I actually had to get therapy. My ex was insecure and constantly accused me of cheating on her. We used to live together, so she'd start wailing anytime I would leave the house to go out with my friends and accuse me of wanting to leave her. I still don't know if she actually had trust issues or if it was just her way of getting me to stay at home, but either way, it worked, and eventually, I stopped meeting anyone outside of work altogether. I earned more than her as well, so she'd constantly bug me to buy her insanely expensive gifts and stuff, and if I refused, she'd throw a tantrum and threaten to leave me. I put up with all of that, simply because I hate giving up on relationships and I really loved her. I guess the final straw was when she demanded that I marry her and start a family with her, and when I refused, we got into a huge fight and she ended up throwing a dinner plate at my head. I managed to dodge it somehow, but I knew then that I had to get out of this relationship somehow. I needed to leave, since if I stayed, I knew that she'd cry and eventually get me to forgive her. And then we'd be stuck in the same cycle once more. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I disappeared while she was asleep. I just didn't think I had any other option, because up till that point, every time I'd even suggested that we break up, she'd started crying and begging me not to leave and made promises that she'd be better now, but eventually, she'd end up doing the same things over and over again. I just didn't want any confrontation because I didn't want to risk it anymore. So I merely packed up all my stuff and disappeared. I blocked her everywhere and erased all traces of myself from the house. This happened almost 13 years ago, so there was no way she could track me down either, because I wasn't big on social media and I'd already informed my family members and friends to block her out as well. I'd ensured that she'd have absolutely no way to contact me ever again, and that was the end of it. After that, I got therapy and decided to stay away from dating for a while, but as fate would have it, just 2 years after I left my ex and was still healing from my past relationship, I met my fiancé through some common friends and we instantly hit it off. We spent a lot of time together and I liked her. I told her all about my past and how I wasn't ready to date just yet, and she said that she'd wait for me to be ready. That's when I knew that she was the one for me. We've been together since, and I'm thrilled that I'm finally getting married to the woman of my dreams. It was all going so well so far, but then a couple of weeks ago, my ex showed up at my workplace and demanded to see me. I was shocked to see her after so many years, and even more shocked to see that she had a kid with her as well. I didn't want her to start screaming at me in front of my coworkers, so I went to the nearest cafe with her so that we could talk. After we had some coffee, she told her son to go play outside so that we could talk, and he did so. As soon as her son was out of earshot, she got to the point and told me that she found the picture of my proposal online and that she'd taken a lot of effort to find out where I live and what I'm up to, so I have to hear her out. I obliged, and she told me that after I left her, she tried to contact me or anyone who knew where I'd be, but found herself cut off entirely. She was depressed for almost a month after that, but then, she found out that she was pregnant and went into panic mode. She went to a lot of my friends' houses to ask them where I was, but they refused to speak to her. Eventually, she decided to raise the child on her own, and she's been doing so for the past 12 years. I asked her why she's approached me now, after so long, since I'd posted the engagement photos a couple of months ago. To that, she said that she didn't have enough money to travel to see me since she'd been living with her parents. I asked her what she wanted, and she told me that she wanted me to pay child support for our son, which she said was a hefty $50,000 for all the money she'd spent until now, and after that, she wanted me to pay $15,000 every month until our son could support himself. She demanded that I pay the money before my wedding or she'll ruin it for me, and even though I didn't show it, I was really scared about what might happen. With the wedding and honeymoon coming up, I had a lot of expenses to think about, and I couldn't just drop $50,000 like that. And another reason I was skeptical about handing over the money is because I wasn't even sure that the child was mine. He was around 12 years old and looked wildly different from me. In fact, he looked a lot more like my stepbrother, who always had a thing for my ex and had even admitted it to me. I know this had huge implications, but the truth is, I was never sure that my ex and stepbrother didn't have a thing while we were together. My stepbrother and I aren't particularly close, but he used to work close to where we live and would sometimes drop by for dinner. They were always awkward and uncomfortable around each other if I was in the room, but seemed perfectly at ease whenever they thought I couldn't hear them. I'd overheard them flirting several times, but I'd never brought it up out of fear of how my ex would react. After that interaction, my ex began texting me every day and reminding me that if I didn't pay her the money before my wedding, she'd ruin everything. But before I gave my ex anything, I just wanted to get a paternity test done just to make sure she was not trying to manipulate me. I wanted to make sure my ex wasn't lying to me just for child support. It was risky and I knew for a fact that my ex would never agree to it if I'd asked her, so I decided to do it all in secret. I'd had to go to great lengths to ensure this was all done in secrecy and somehow managed to acquire DNA samples from my stepbrother. I paid him a surprise visit and he was quite shocked to see me since I usually don't drop by to see him. I asked if I could use the loo and then I took his toothbrush. So the very next day, I asked my ex if I could have a day out with my son, just to bond. She was pretty suspicious and was quite reluctant, but I insisted and said that I wanted to make up for lost time and bond with him. She finally agreed and was probably glad to do so as well since she could have some time to herself finally. I picked him up from the hotel she'd been living in and we headed to the clinic where a friend of mine works for the test to be done. I'd told the child to not breathe a word of this to his mother and even bought him quite a bit of candy to ensure his silence. He seemed to be a quiet kid in general, so I wasn't too worried. After the test, when I had dropped my ex's son off at the hotel and she came to see me and tried to flirt with me and suggested that since I was being so accepting of our son, I should also probably consider leaving my fiancé and getting back together with her so that we can finally be a perfect family. I'd laughed it off instead of saying anything since I didn't want her to cause a scene in the middle of the hotel lobby. She even asked me out for dinner but I declined, saying that I don't feel too well, which was a bad move because then she asked me to accompany her to her room so that we could have dinner as a family. Her behavior started freaking me out, so I hastily made up some excuse about some pending work and rushed back home. And when I got the results, just as I'd suspected, while her son and I weren't a match, my stepbrother and her son definitely were. After I got the results, I was so relieved because I'd really be shattered if the child had turned out to be mine and I'd have to deal with my ex for the rest of my life. When I got home, after work that day, my fiancée could sense that there was something off and I ended up spilling everything to her. It had really been weighing on me, keeping this huge secret, and I'm glad that I decided to tell her. She'd been a little worried about me as well and she'd thought that I was getting cold feet, so she was also relieved to know the truth. After I told her everything, she said that I need not worry and no matter what the results said, she'd support me in whatever decision I made. I felt like I fell in love with her all over again when she said that. And now that we knew for a fact that I'm certainly not the father of my ex's child and neither of us have anything to worry about, that day, my ex texted me yet again, asking me out for dinner and telling me to ditch my fiancé so that we could be together and raise our son. I showed my fiancé that text and even she revealed something pretty strange to me. She showed me a few texts from when we'd first started dating and I'd posted her on my socials. My stepbrother had obviously seen that and texted her, telling her that she could do a lot better than me, and asked her out. She'd obviously ignored it, but in spite of that, he'd continued to text her for the first few months of us being together. It was only when we celebrated 6 months of being together that he finally got the hint and stopped bothering her. I asked her why she hadn't told me before and she said that she'd meant to inform me the first time that it happened but didn't want to cause unnecessary drama between me and my stepbrother. And with time, it just got weirder and weirder to bring up, so she just chose to ignore it. Eventually, she forgot about it as well, and since my stepbrother doesn't really visit and she only has to see him at family events where there are a ton of other people as well, she found it easier to deal with. Like I'd said earlier, I'd never particularly gotten along with my stepbrother and always had a feeling that he was a little jealous of me. He's almost 2 years older than me and our parents got married when both of us were in our late teens. So naturally there was a certain degree of rivalry between the two of us. I always was better than him when it came to sports and most of the girls in my high school really seemed to like me. He was way better at me academically, but he could just not deal with the fact that so many girls used to crush on me, and I guess that stuck with him even as we grew older. Now that I think about it, most of the girls I'd been with had always been uneasy around my stepbrother, so I think this ritual of trying to get with my girlfriends has been going on for quite a while. We never were the best of friends or anything of the sort, but this is just low and made me mad. My fiancée told me that on the surface, it never seemed like we had any animosity and she didn't want to ruin that, so she stayed quiet about everything. Maybe that's what all the other girls thought as well, and I'm kicking myself for never asking about it, either. But whatever, we eventually came up with a plan that would expose both my ex-girlfriend and my stepbrother in front of our family. It was petty and mean, but I didn't care anymore. I'd spent a lot of my life forgiving people and letting things go, and that just wasn't happening this time. My ex, just 2 days ago, texted me and threatened to ruin me if I didn't get back with her or give her the money. In the meantime, I postponed the actual day of the wedding to a week later for any guest who was not a part of my immediate family or friend circle. I also invited my ex-girlfriend's parents to the fake wedding, saying that she's actually getting married to me and I would like for them to be there as a surprise for her so that they can witness firsthand how insane their daughter is and just how low she can stoop. So, we went through with the whole thing, and man, what a day it was. My parents were kind of shocked to see such a few people, but I told them that it'd all make sense later. My ex's parents showed up right on time and were really confused as well to see me with my fiancée. I told them the same thing as well, that it'd all make sense in a while. I could sense that my stepbrother was getting uncomfortable, but I somehow managed to convince him to stay until finally, within around 15 minutes of the scheduled time for the ceremony to begin, my ex showed up with her son in tow. As soon as she got out of the cab, everyone present was stunned. My stepbrother and my ex's parents in particular looked extra shocked, and I just wish I could have captured the whole thing on camera because it was just so satisfying. She looked really smug. She probably thought that she finally had me cornered and would now successfully ruin my marriage. She walked right up to me and shoved her son in front, who just looked confused and embarrassed amidst all those people, and I felt really bad for him. She went on to announce in front of all my close friends and family how I'd abandoned her after getting her pregnant, and when she finally managed to track me down after more than a decade, I refused to compensate her financially for bringing up our son, which is why she was here to expose my reality. The entire time, my stepbrother was trying to hide his face and pretend he wasn't there, and I could see how uneasy he was. I guess my ex hadn't yet spotted her parents seated among the guests yet, and so she continued talking about how she'd been completely on her own, exaggerating her story so that people would feel more sympathetic for her and would hate me more. I didn't even interrupt her, and nobody else said a word because of how shocked they were either. Finally, after almost 10 minutes of her rant, she stopped and turned around to demand compensation, or else she'd be suing me. That's when I pulled out the paternity test results and announced who the real father actually was. It was a sight to behold and felt like something straight out of a soap opera. My stepdad and mother looked livid, while my stepbrother went red in the face out of shame and embarrassment. Everyone else looked totally scandalized, and for a good few seconds, there was total silence. Then, my ex's parents stood up, and I guess she finally spotted them. She'd already started panicking when I announced the real father, and when she saw her parents, she actually screamed out loud. The chaos that ensued was insane, and I'm still trying to process what happened. My ex's parents of course dragged her out while she wailed, apologized, and tried to blame this whole situation on me all at once. It was really pathetic, but at least she was gone. I felt bad for the kid, though, because this wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for a crazy mom. I told my close friends that the actual wedding was scheduled for the next day, and before leaving, they let me know that they were actually very proud of me for humiliating this woman who had done nothing but try to make me as miserable as she humanely could. So that was pretty nice. And as for my own family, we sat down in the living room afterward to have a talk. I had nothing to say to my stepbrother, but by then, he'd overcome the initial shock of the revelation and was furious about what I'd done. He tried to convince our parents that I was the one at fault here, but his own father, my stepdad, told him that he had no business trying to get with my girlfriend at all. I'd been saving the screenshots of him hitting on my fiancée for that very moment, and as soon as I showed those to our parents, he knew that he had no way out. This just enraged my stepdad even more, and he told him that if he didn't take responsibility for his actions and apologize to me, there'd be dire consequences for him. My stepbrother tried to fight back but eventually gave in, and albeit begrudgingly, he apologized to me. He's not going to be invited to family gatherings that I host, and I made it very clear that I'm going no contact with him, so if our parents decide to have me and my fiancée over, they'll have to make sure that I don't have to meet him, and they agreed. Overall, it was pretty humiliating for both my ex and my stepbrother, and I'm really hoping that they've learnt their lesson after this. But just a few hours ago, my ex sent me a long text about how her parents were going to kick her out and all of this was my fault. She said that she was going to end up on the streets with her son, simply because I wanted to be petty. And even though a couple days have passed since the incident, I feel really guilty since I had chosen to expose her like this in spite of knowing that this could ruin her life. Especially her kid, who had no role to play in any of this but will have to suffer now. So am I the a-hole for exposing my ex and stepbrother by throwing a fake wedding and exposing them both for what they'd done to me in the past? Update 1, just for the record, my fiancée was totally on board with this and even suggested that we invite my ex's parents, as she believes that this will teach them both a lesson for trying to mess with me. And I found out that my ex had been lying again. After my ex-girlfriend was dragged out by her parents, she'd probably refused to leave out of shame, or maybe her parents had decided to leave her there stranded and alone. Whatever it was, she had been loitering outside my house while I discussed this whole thing with my parents and stepbrother about what to do next. My parents informed me that after they left, they saw my stepbrother head over to her to make amends and had probably offered to let her live with him, and she'd accepted since they'd seen her drive away in his car. It was lucky that my parents had seen that happening. I don't even know why they'd come up with such a stupid plan given that they knew that my parents had seen them drive away together. They informed me a few hours after I received my ex's text and I was feeling really down in the dumps, but after my parents' clarification, I'm glad that I didn't fall for her little act. And I'm even happier that I decided to expose the two of them. Honestly, that was long overdue as well. I'd always been kinder to them than they'd been to me, but they'd always taken it for granted, and now I've had enough of it. My stepbrother had always known how much I loved my ex, but that hadn't stopped him from getting with her, and neither did that stop him from trying to hit on my fiancée. He deserved this. As for my ex, I think this was a pretty befitting punishment for trying to literally blackmail me into paying her such a huge sum of money. Especially when she's not even sure if the baby is mine or not. I'd felt sort of guilty for plotting this way against her and my stepbrother, but my fiancé reminded me that had I not conducted the paternity test, my ex would have had no issues creating a scene at our wedding and ruining my married life before it had even begun just for that money. And even my stepbrother had pretty much tried to stab me in the back by hitting on my girlfriends just over some silly high school rivalry. Had they been better people and just not tried to take advantage of my tendency to avoid drama, they wouldn't have to deal with any of this at all and we'd all be happy. And to be honest, some part of me is really happy that I can finally get back at my ex for all the pain and trauma that she put me through in those 5 years. I can hardly believe that while she'd constantly been accusing me of cheating, she'd actually been cheating on me the whole time. It's really ironic now that I think about it, but it's okay because they finally got what they deserved. Update 2, my ex-girlfriend texted me again, asking if I was going to at least apologize or send her some money, but now that I knew the truth, I told her that she and my stepbrother could stop planning and plotting against me since I knew the truth. It's sad how desperate the two of them are, but whatever, it's not my problem anymore and I'm glad that they're finally out of my life now. I texted them saying that I knew they were living together now and I was well aware that this was nothing but a sad little strategy to try and stir up some sympathy so that I'd cough up some cash. I told them that I wasn't falling for their sad little act anymore, and if they didn't stop harassing me for money then I'd report them to the cops. I've blocked both their numbers and made sure that there's no way that they can contact me anymore, and I'm hoping to have a drama-free wedding now. Update 3, we got married today. It was small and intimate and absolutely beautiful. Afterward, we had an absolute blast dancing to our favorite songs and drinking champagne. When all the guests had almost left, my stepdad pulled me aside and expressed how apologetic he was about what my stepbrother had done. I told him not to worry about it, but he insisted that he wanted to make up for it and offered to take care of my honeymoon expenses for me. I had it handled and was going to decline, but my mother stepped in as well and told me to consider it a wedding gift from them. That I couldn't say no to it, so now my wife and I are packing for our completely free trip to France. We're just really happy and can't wait to spend the rest of our lives together.